knowledge box that is important in thinking about the different aspects of not only sleep, but circadian rhythm. And
Better.
we talked yesterday about the process S, which is the sleep, which is the buildup of sleep drive that comes from lack of sleep, from your last sleep period, and the other then is your circadian. So what's the origin of the circadian rhythm? What's the biological basis for it, and what are the clinical issues? Either humans trying to exist in a circadian world, or the circadian world trying to exist in it. A process C counters process S in two particular areas of the day. One is it goes up fairly rapidly as you waken, and there's an orexin level that now has been described in humans that occurs early on after awakening. And then there is another, as yet, and orexin goes up and kind of comes down, but this other area here between about 7 and 10 is called the forbidden zone, and circadian processes and increase awareness at that period of time. So if you call college students between 7 and 11 at night, they're generally, they may have slept from 4 to 8, or they may stay up then further, but those are the sorts of things. And one of the questions you can always ask if people are really sleepy is, do you fall asleep at time? Many people will say, no, I fall asleep right here at the end of the afternoon from 5 to 6 or so. And then that gives them a problem with their nighttime sleep. Oh, it's going to be on my watch. It's not going to get anywhere. So circadian rhythm. Circadian sleep rhythm. Sleep is a brain-generated state, human sleep habitat. So we're going to talk about this circadian rhythm, and there's an area of the brain, suprachiasmatic nucleus, which kind of organizes your perception of light. But then there are clocks all over your body, and each of the organs have a clock, and each of them have these clock genes, and each of them are hooked up to various outputs in different ways. And if they're all in harmony, that's health. If they're in disharmony, it usually means that there's going to be a problem. And that's really the kind of the next frontier for circadian rhythm in disease, is that when does this disharmony happen in the peripheral clocks versus the central clocks? At least that's the heuristic that they're using to test. So how do you measure circadian rhythm in your kidney? How do you do it in your liver? How do you do it in your heart? How do you do it in your muscle? And how do you understand what those processes are all about? And how do, I mean, I can't, these Olympic athletes that are now, training on the East Coast and then have their stuff in the evening on the West Coast, or people that are those athletes, and how they do that with their circadian rhythm is quite important. So what's the origin of circadian rhythm? Well, this is night and day in planet Earth. And you can't do everything at once. That may be the origin of circadian rhythm. I just learned the other day that you see that line there between light and dark is a little fuzzy. The line between the light and dark on the moon is just like a line. On one side, it's minus 300 degrees, and on the other side, it's plus 300. And the reason we have dawn and dusk is because of our atmosphere. And our atmosphere is the one that brings you on the rotation of the sun going through the atmosphere, going from dawn and dusk. I thought that was pretty interesting. And that's one of the physical constraints that they have to figure out how to do if you're gonna live on the moon. So evolution, this. So evolution of light sensitivity and sleep. So archaea, when they've been able to culture them, and bacteria show a light sensitivity. And that if you put them in light dark alternating cycles, and you do this, that they do respond differently in a cyclic fashion. They sink into light and dark. Algae occurs, fungi, plants, and the idea is somewhere after fungi and plants went out there in the animal world, there now was a development of sleep. Now, what's interesting is that they think that the original light sensitivity comes at a point in when atmospheric oxygen levels are high. Those oxygen the levels then go from the near zero to almost one atmosphere. And that the other point here is not really clear, but it's something to do with these different oscillators that come in. Per is one we'll talk about, period gene oscillator. And this FRQ is another one that they circadian oscillator. But oscillators are there early on. Calcium signaling, other ROS pathways. So spatial orientation of sleep within a daily cycle, subtle temporal organization. And sleep biology came out of circadian rhythm. This is by Linnaeus, and talks about even in overcast weather, an open field, the person would be able to tell time as precisely if you have a clock with them in terms of how the plants go in and out. I have morning glories. Well, I call them morning glories. My wife calls them weeds that are out there. Open in the morning, close at night. That's be able to sort of see. And this is the 2017 Rosbach, Hall, and Young got the Nobel Prize. The two of them were working in the same lab, one was not. And they had worked with Drosophila, and they found the discovery of the period gene that was in Drosophila. And the discovery really that what it gave them the Nobel Prize was the first gene to be identified through observations of behavior. Now, what does that mean? That means you look at something and you can find what a gene is like. And what they were looking at is Drosophila and their activity-inactivity cycles. And look out the window and see people activity and inactivity cycles. And this was not a sort of a cellular physiologic sort of observation and discovery. So it took them some time to get this. Phyllis Z was one of the people that worked with Michael Rosbach and in her work with circadian illnesses. And so it kind of goes back to where these people. So circadian, the fruit fly, you have direct light that goes to that activates something called cry, and then it goes to tim and per, timing and period. They go to the clock gene, and it comes out of the cytoplasm. It goes back in and activates per and tim that go back to work with per and tim. So direct light in fruit flies. But in mammals, or mice, we have eyes. And those eyes then transduce that light, and there's similar genes that are there, per, cry, tim, They're hooked up a little bit differently. BMAL is an important one in looking at in mice circadian rhythm research, and the clock gene, which is very important for timing in humans as well as in mammals. So this particular part of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the eyes transduce the light, and it's too far. There have been people who have been trying to take blind people and activate the suprachiasmatic nucleus with really shiny lights through the skull, but they can't do it. It has to come through this kind of area, this tract, the retinothalamic hypothalamic tract, which has galanin as its receptor, to be able to see. So if you're blind in your occipital lobe, you still have circadian rhythm. If you are blind in cutting the eyes out or deformed eyes, you won't have circadian rhythm. But there are instances in which light is still, even in a blind person, where light can activate a circadian rhythm. And there are clusters of these cells that are the suprachiasmatic. So the circadian metabolism, goes from about 37.15 all the way down to 36.7. I don't think we would recognize any of that in terms of how you feel it, although you can measure it and you can in humans. But what you see is that there is a circadian pattern to this. And if we put it to hours of sleep onset, that is sleep onset, and this is the negative, so this would be daylight and this would be sleep, you have this period of time. You generally start to sleep when the downslope of this circadian temperature dip. And that particular temperature dip then comes up during and you generally start to wake up as it starts to get to a set point. Now, if we could measure this in everyone, then you would be able to have people come in and say, okay, I really can't sleep till 2 o'clock at night, and you'd be able to see whether or not their internal clock, that is their circadian clock, is in sync with their external clock. I've got a little device from Masimo which measures temperature. You put it on here, you look on your phone. It's another wearable thing, but that would be kind of interesting to use in terms of it's a disposable. But we generally try to get inactivity cycles as a surrogate marker for circadian activity. So light comes in, goes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and then is an interesting process in the suprachiasmatic nucleus in order to get melatonin to come out at night. So when it does, it relays through the superior cervical ganglion that goes back up to the pineal gland that then releases melatonin. Well, why do you think that is such a long way? Well, that's the result of going from direct light to having a neural circuit. So at some point, the superior cervical ganglion and the suprachiasmatic nucleus and the melatonin were probably very close to each other with the growth and development of the brain and brainstem and sympathetic activation. The sympathetic ganglion is this superior cervical ganglion. So things like propranolol can alter circadian rhythm. Not a big effect, but they can do that. So the pineal gland is only probably about 4 or 5 millimeters away from suprachiasmatic nucleus, and yet the signaling has to go down through the brainstem. And people there are people that have a spinal cord injury and cervical injury that injures that particular. So what happens with the suprachiasmatic nucleus? What does it do? Well, we talked a little bit already about the pineal gland and the sympathetic system via the superior cervical ganglion, but it has these other distributed features, generally through something called the dorsal medial nucleus. The only time they'll ever ask you this is in performance. It's not actually in terms of anyone doing anything clinically. But you can see that it also works on orexin and VLPO for sleep, which we talked about yesterday, paraventricular, hypothalamus, steroids, temperature regulation, appetite, satiety. And so it has a whole set of distributions. And it's not kind of like blasting it out. It's pretty well regulated. And there are people working on this nucleus. Understand precisely what its connectivity is. That's part of the brain connectivity description thing that's going on for like 10 years at a young age. Find out what every neuron in the brain is connected to whatever neuron and what are the networks. The limbic system and visceral and the cortex is also involved. They're mostly, or they can be very indirect through these. Now, gene expression of 24-hour period in the liver. This is a good example of that a lot of things are going on in the liver that have a circadian rhythm, including the genetic expression. And you've got cry genes, which you say, okay, and BMAL, which we talked about here, a clock gene, which is there. Another cry gene is here, cry 2. Per1, 2, but you have these other genes that are there in the circadian mode, and it's estimated that of all the transcription factors that are in a liver cell, that some 30 to 40% of them have circadian effect. Now, that means that your metabolism of drugs, that means your ability to synthesize. That means you're sinking in with eating, you're going to make bile acids, or all the sorts of things that you got to learn about when the liver is under the circadian. I have yet to find, well, it might be one recently, but up to about 2 years ago, there was no part of gastroenterology that has circadian. So, sort of really, but pain, bowel movements don't happen when you're asleep, so that's actually one of the things in their recognition strategies for Crohn's disease. If you have a bowel movement in the middle of the night, it's sort of, they go, oh, that's wrong. And everybody's had one every now and then, but on a regular basis, that's really. So early studies of human circadian rhythm sort of put people into caves. And they, and this is an example of the interval. So they go along pretty well. They start to get into a cave, have no light. They put a light into the cave and they start to sync up again. So these are activity inactivity profiles. And generally these are the inactivity profiles. This is the activity. And you can see it gets disrupted. And so what they were saying is that when you are in that particular environment, you need to have light to be able to sync in your activity and activity cycle. So this guy emerged after 179 days. He thought he had only been in the cave for 151. Maybe that's the way of lengthening. And Daniel Kleitman was the one that discovered REM sleep. He went in Mammoth Cave and slept in there. Now, and then here's another one. It was flawed in retrospect. So why was it flawed? Well, you had some light, but you also had lots of other people in there. lots of, you had social interactions, you had all sorts of other things. And food is another zeitgeber, that is one that's a time giver. Activity is a zeitgeber, time giver. Light is the strongest, or generally thought to be the strongest. You'll find people in which they use alcohol as a major thing to try to go to sleep, and that becomes a zeitgeber. And so you sort of sit there, and that's the whole thing about, well, what do you do before you go to sleep? What tells you that you're gonna go to sleep? What is it, and in kids, if you have kids, you look at them and you go, they're sleeping, and they're usually bouncing up and down. Because they're hyperactive, because they're trying to overcome their sleep. So then they're ready, and what do? Well, you try to slow them down. You try to read them a book, try to do that. Well, when you're an adult, they forget all of that. So what you're trying to do is get people back into a circadian rhythm so that they're prepared to go to sleep, prepared to wake up. It's really extraordinary to go to sleep when it's light now and wake up when it's light. Compared to 6 months from now, where you can go to sleep. It's already been dark for 2 or 3 hours. So there are body temperature, melatonin, core temperature, sleep propensity, and this is the sleep period. This idealized sleep period. It goes from 11 o'clock till 7 o'clock. That's the Western ideal, right? That's really kind of like their 20th century ideal, and that's also flawed because when you are a physiologist and you say this is the only way it should be, and all of a sudden you think the only way it should be is the way it is for you, and you go to bed at 11 and you wake up at 7, then the rest of the world, catches a cold because maybe they don't sleep the way you sleep, or maybe in the Western Sahara they don't sleep the way you sleep. So you sort of try to figure out how people sleep. But in general, sleep propensity increases when melatonin increases, but it's not a sleep and go. It's really a sleep period molecule. And core temperature is really when this period of sleep is initiated, is a fall temperature. Notice that little dip there? That's what, 3 o'clock in the afternoon? That's after lunch. Everybody says, oh, lunch makes me sleepy. Well, it does, because lunch increases your body temperature because you have to digest it. But then what happens is it falls further. And then if you have sleep deprivation, that dip in the afternoon is greater as well. So it's time to sort of ask people about when do they nap, when do they nap, how do they nap? Yes?
So as climate change is happening, it's getting hotter, and I mean, most people don't have air conditioning across the world. How do you think that is gonna impact sleep?
Well, let's go on here and see how they sleep in the Sahara.
Let's talk.
Right, it'll go on. That's where you sleep. So this is an important concept, mid-sleep period. And what you try to do is find out when they go to sleep, when they wake up, and in your brain as a sleep doc, at least to me, I sit there and I go, okay, 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 to 3 is their mid-sleep period. And the reason that mid-sleep period is important is because if you're going to mess around with circadian rhythm, there are different effects of light depending on which side of this divide are you on. But the mid-sleep period is useful because now you can sort of have a number that you can put on an individual or a group of individuals, or what's that? Well, that's the time between the rise of melatonin and when you start to go to sleep. And you notice it's about 2 hours, so that's what we tell them, to take their melatonin 2 hours. So this is the Western model, is like this. And you have circadian alignment, cellular metabolism, autonomic nervous system, appetite, vigilance. And this is if you take a regular 11 to 7 sleeper. Highest alertness seems to be in the morning. Fastest increase in blood pressure, cortisol release, lowest body temperature, sleep, deep sleep, melatonin, highest blood pressure. and best coordination. There are 5 studies that have looked at whether or not you take your blood pressure medications in the morning, or do you take them at night? And 4 out of 5. And they were all in New England Journal. 4 out of 5 said the best effect on all day blood pressure is if you take it at night. Maybe that's because your highest blood pressure is here, but it also is this dip at night in your blood pressure is thought to be. So there's a concept of sleep health, which we can talk about at a time, but there is a circadian health concept and construct. So Robert McNish in 1834, so sleep in the intermediate state between wakefulness and death. There you go. See, that's the 19th century. Being regarded as an active state of all animal and intellectual functions and a total suspension. Premise sleep is passive, inactive state. Now, sleep is a dynamic and actively produced brain state with accompanying changes in physiology. Do not turn off, and some brain regions are more active during sleep than during wake. Lower in some hormones like growth hormone, some of them secreted selectively during sleep, although some hormones are consistent. So the first phase is this is really 1950s research when you can finally measure sleep and you can figure out really when people are asleep and not sleep and not sleep. You can measure sleep over a 24-hour period, and that really told people that the brain was. The second phase was all these growth. So there's a tremendous literature in your textbooks on hormonal regulation, and those that are particularly like cortisol, which really is at least one night of sleep deprivation. It still has its rhythm that it had previous. Whereas growth hormone, which went up during slow wave sleep the previous night, now was inhibited. Now, growth hormone can be measured or estimated from measurements of growth hormone 2, IFG2. And because growth hormone itself has a 20-minute half-life, so you can't measure that during the day. IGF-2. So if you measure IGF-2, you get a sort of a hemoglobin A1C of growth hormone. And it was a big splash at the end of the 80s and early 90s when people were measuring these in metabolic units. But it didn't make it into clinical use, although Phyllis Z now is looking at blood samples and being able to take 2 blood samples during the day, one at 8 o'clock in the morning, one at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and looking at the gene profile in your blood and estimating what kind of circadian rhythm you have. So stage very light sleep, light but maintained, deep, slow wave. And this is the 60s. So this was described, and this was sort of finally codified into this is these stages that you go into. That's the ideal 1970s model, is when you go into N3 sleep, you pop out into REM sleep, you have less N3 sleep and more REM sleep during an idealized night. And unfortunately, that's what the Fitbits involve. That's what they call the, a 92 versus a 72 sleep quality. They take this, which is imprecise. They put this in there, which is sort of a 70s view of that's what everybody should be. And they say, voila, your sleep number is 72. Why don't you improve it? And can we improve it for you? That's really their basis of it. And why? They're not trying to pretend that they're medical people. In fact, if they try to do that, the FDA would slap them right down. They're trying to do health. They're not trying to do illness. So they just read the literature, get some ideas from various people and say, how can we get this algorithm to do this AI, and can it fit to this thing? How well does it do it? And it's a 72% fit versus a 92% fit. And you're at, and you come in and go, oh, I'm sleeping. My watch says I'm sleeping. How do you feel? Oh, I feel fine. My watch, and oh, by the way, I just went through exam. You know. So sleep is an ultradian rhythm, and this is a relatively healthy adult, 1980s, in which you have activity and an actigraph. And one is day one, which is these are periods of activity. These periods of time when there's nothing is usually when they take a shower, they take a and then there's a period in which it's really quiet, very few little blips in there, and then there's a, it starts to come up again, and you take this particular pattern of activity, inactivity profiles, and you colorize it to say, well, this is probably when they're asleep, and this is midnight, and you see it's relatively, relatively there, and then this is what the watch tells you is your sleep regular. And it sort of sits there and says, oh, you have a regular wake up time, a regular go to sleep time. And more importantly, it's probably a regular wake up time. They don't tell you, they just want you to fix both of them. And this is the instance. And this is, it doesn't tell you the day of the week, sometimes that's important. But this is a healthy rhythm. And so if you take the line with circadian rhythm, sleep health is aligned with circadian rhythm. What you're looking for is this mid-sleep time, and this mid-sleep time is where you're in actigraphy and try to get this mid-sleep. Now I show this is the drop then in temperature, and then the temperature goes up during the daytime and active and things of that sort. So this is the clock, b-ball, cry per Tim in mid-sleep time, and guess what? Are you a night owl or a morning lark? So you can take mid-sleep time and you can sort of take a whole group of people and find their mid-sleep time. And you can look at their mid-sleep time as being when is it? Is it 3 of them? Is it, and what is the best time for it? And what you see here is from 10 years of age to 80 years of age, there is a difference in general by aging after the age of 20 in terms of your mid-sleep time comes lower. And so therefore the implication is that's why older people sleep shorter because their mid-sleep times are true. But on the other hand, if you go into owls and larks, this is owl lark and this is lark down up here, get up early. The men and women are a bit different too as well in this particular study, and I'm sorry. I may have it on the next. So if you think in the morning, act at noon, eat in the evening, and sleep at night. How about that? Right? Brain generates. But this mid-sleep time, sleep is not anesthesia. Mid-sleep time has been linked to PER genes and to clock genes. And so you can find sort of genetic signals. They're imperfect. And usually they've been found if you have a particular family that has a trait like an early rise or a trait late night. And that's why you have, when you ask about a thorough sleep history, you say your mother, your father, were they night owls or were they larks? You try to get a sense of what this is. And more particularly, that it's the night owls, because those are the guys that say, I can't go to sleep, I'm sleeping, go back. And you realize that all families usually likes to stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock. And you get these tremendous histories of whole families on Friday and Saturday night. I'll stay watching because that's what I prefer to do. So there we go. Sleep-like states in many research organisms, it emerges out of circadian rhythm is defined by periods of quiescence that have a loss of tone. And then arousal and control, alertness, homeostatic, regulated, deprived, they rebound, and they evolve using similar genes. So excellent. Sleep quality. So how do you communicate to the public about the importance of sleep? I mean, everybody talks about sleep, they all do it. How do you kind of get their attention? And you start doing it with this particular, I don't want to say it's more like pseudoscience. I mean, what? Sleep depth? How do you subjectively say, well, you need to sleep deeper? Was that actionable as an individual? Can you tell your 14-year-old to sleep deeper? No, you don't. Continuity, sleep without fragmentation. Well, that's probably doable. Take away the cell phone. Don't be on call with your beeper. All those sorts of things are probably a good idea. The other is duration. Of all these things, duration is really the major one that's been studied. And sleep duration has a U-shaped curve. That is, if you have less than about 6 hours of sleep, it goes up as a in terms of mortality. And if you have generally have more than about 9 hours of sleep, mortality. That was first done by the American Cancer Society in the 60s, and that was the first time they had a U-shaped curve. And they went to all their American Cancer outlets and said, I want you to ask everybody that you can about this, how long you sleep, send it in, and then they sort of followed their mortality over time. And that was the first sort of big study. And they had 135,000 individuals. Sleep duration in mammals. It's interesting that it probably relates to how big you are. Elephants sleep about, well, they can sleep as long as 10 minutes at a time, but more like 5 minutes at a time. And that's, people don't know why, because, you know, there's no one that's being a predator of themselves. But I think it's just that that's the way they are. And then the other is the opossum and the swallow sleep. I mean, our dogs sleep crazy. So it's, the principle though, it may not be what the size of the animal is, but the body surface area, the energy. And there is an energy theory of homeostasis that predicts sleep. Those are mathematicians that get it. Two-process model. What does it do to be able to pose the homeostatic drive from sleep? Then wakefulness is strength of drive to sleep is coupled with the duration of wakefulness, vigilance, reset to baseline by adding sleep. Sleep is coupled with accumulation of sleep services. Repeated this from yesterday. Sleep and Drosophila are consolidated in long circadian periods of quiescence, arouses to full alertness, associated with changes in gene expression. It's modulated by caffeine and Valium, and you sleep restricted and they sleep longer. So what's the lifespan? Yeah, 3 days. But you know, a lot of graduate students looking through a lot of microscopes. Now they have automated things in which they can put individual fruit flies into a little glass, and they have lasers and see where they move and quiet and what they do. And they'll actually, the first description of REM sleep in the fruit fly was they stayed up all night with the infrared, and they watched, and the fruit flies would get quiet, they'd sit down somewhere, and they'd follow. Cool. I watched a hippo at the Toronto Zoo. They have the hippo in the water, and it's in the water, and it goes, it was asleep, and you could watch it through a clear panel. There's this hippo down there, and he wouldn't have to take breaths, so he'd go up and take a breath, like like the elephant seal, they don't stop their sleep, they just take a breath, come back down. And then, and then, and then he was there at the bottom, and all of a sudden he went, went to the side and got up and went. So it's really powerful. Homeostatic response to sleep deprivation for 6 hours. And what you get is your baseline is this red, and your recovery day here, and you get recovery sleep in the food form. So they have what, 4,000 neurons? And this is important. Oh, here it is, human preference, mid-sleep time. This is you take a whole bunch of people and you look for GWAS and you figure out the SNPs in the PER gene, and you find that there is a mid-sleep time period that depends on what your peer per 3 and whether or not you have 4-4, 3-4, or 3-3. And P4 exists, does not, P3 exists in humans, P3 is not essential, polymorphic, and 3 per logs, gene duplications. I get very intrigued by genetics. What you can see is you can actually detect differences in genes in populations. These are interlocking groups for creating the circuit. PER is not the only one. So you got your PER gene here, PER2 gene here, and you have other genes that people have detected in terms of SNPs. This is called Manhattan plot on the bottom. Anybody know that? Have you ever heard that before? Manhattan plot is you take all the genes here, and if it's above a certain level here, they put it at about 8. And what that is, the significance value, and it's 10 to the 8th being significant for multiple comparisons. When you have 23 genes and there are 23 chromosomes, and you have genes that are almost chromosomes, and then if it's above that, then it's likely to have some significance. So here you see 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you see about 8 different genes, and if you really, you know, it's hard to figure out the functional importance of each of those genes. But the idea that PER is there and it's found in families and it's clinically actionable or clinically there. So it correlates to mean sleep, mean sleep, mid-sleep, mid-sleep. So how does this biology play out in culture and society? This is sort of fun. So sit there and say, okay, I want to house a population. I want to house a population which I have to build the houses, subsidized housing. I want to do that downtown Cleveland. So what do I have to worry about? Well, I have to worry about safety. I have to worry about parking. I have to worry about light. I have to worry about where they are to various things. Do I worry about sleep? You know, it's not even in any of it. It's starting to come into the design of public housing. So in the kids, if you have people you down here, you say, well, where do the kids sleep? And sometimes they'll sleep in the bedroom, sometimes they'll sleep in the living room. But it really depends on where the windows are to the parking lot. And why is that important? Because that's where the gunshots come. So you sort of have to sit there and realize that that's what people are organizing their life. They know that sort of. And then where do you sleep? At one of the places that does the homeless housing transition, the kids, they just take the mattresses off the beds, put them on the floor and sleep on the floor because they've always slept. And you know, that's different from my life, but you have to realize that that's what they're used to. So here you go, 3 pre-industrial societies. One is the Hadza in May, Tuzma in Bolivia, San in January and February, and then San in May and June. And these are mid-sleep times. And so what you see immediately is that in different parts of the world, mid-sleep times are different. And that they even in one particular region, if you measure, this was like 28 individuals in each one measured twice, as mid-sleep time changes from midsummer to. So it's hard to predict and there's no ideal mid-sleep time. This is then from a review of that. These are Mazda hunter-gatherers, and they have a nap in the afternoon. Pre-industrial Western Europeans usually have 2 sleeps. There's a sociologist, historian in Virginia who's written a book about 19th century sleep, and 2 sleeps was very important. The prototype, the person that's like Charles Dickens would walk the streets of London between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Present day Westerners, and then magazine villagers, in which they have 5 sleep. Now, are they ill because they have those things? They don't consider themselves ill. They consider themselves a viable population, has culture, that has training. Are they underdeveloped? No, they got brains like we do. I mean, people, the understanding of intelligence, and the idea that intelligence somehow is getting better as we have more and more generations is being challenged, because you had to can sort of address the same problems if you're in the middle of Papua New Guinea as you do in the middle of New York City. How are you going to survive? How are you going to eat? How are you going to make sure that these people are friend or foe? And it may be a little more complicated, although maybe it's a little better, because the major cause of death in those populations are usually either war or accidents. So artificial night sky brightness, this is light pollution. Seen this probably before, late 50s, mid 70s, 1997. The idea of the night sky and light and what it is and how it's affected by artificial light in our cities. Electricity shortens sleep, but it doesn't produce circadian misalignment. So you can see that electricity is there and it shortens the sleep period. No, electricity lengthens it. These were 2 Argentinian pre-industrial communities, one with access to electricity and so it doesn't change your circadian rhythm, it just changes how much what you can do when you have electricity, what we do when you have late night TV. You shorten your sleep. Middle of the night awakenings were common. Charles Dickens would go to sleep by 8:30, wake up at 1, sleep for 2 hours of sleep. And in recreating the light dark cycles of 35 to 50,000 years ago in the lab in Washington, they had people come in and say, okay, you're going to be in a dark, non-electrified part, and they did it for like 3 weeks. What they first found is people slept 10 hours, 11 hours, 4 or 5 days. Then they snapped back to about 6 hours. But what did they do? They broke into 2 sleeps. The predominant part of the first sleep was non-REM sleep. The predominant second sleep was REM sleep. Didn't know what to do with that, but that was interesting in terms of trying to say, wow, modern day humans adjust to being in a cave 6 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock. Modern industrial revolution is marked by the invention of cotton manufacturing, electricity permitting light at any time. And now we have a 24/7 society. When I was growing up, you didn't do any banking after 5 o'clock. No. Here's what happens if you have a hunter-gatherer pattern, that is versus a modern day industrial pattern, you know. sleep rule. Yeah. It's interesting, the light intensity that we get, it's not very, this is not very good light, bright light here. You can get full spectrum lights for all these things, they're expensive. Especially the fluorescent bulbs. The fluorescent bulbs that are full spectrum are about, they were at one time about $3.50 per bulb. And those that are the regular intensity were $2 a bulb. So if you're buying 10,000 of those things, that's what you do. But where do you find the high intensity full spectrum? You've experienced it. Outside, but where do they buy lights for full spectrum? No. Hospitals are terrible. We have, you know, there have been studies trying to put it in, and overlight is where it works. Dress shops and car sales, because that makes the colors pop, right? So if you ever walk into one of those dress shops and you get in front of the light and you put the thing in, it'll be full spectrum light, and you don't notice it really, you just say, well, that's pretty bright, but it's also really clear compared to this. And you can do it if you get in my room, for instance, and turn on the overhead lights and you got it on. Okay. I used to, and it's hard to buy full spectrum lights. I was fortunate one time to walk into a wholesale place and sort of say, I'd like to have a box, and they didn't ask me who I was. The second time I did, they asked me, well, aren't you paying with a company credit card? And I said, no. They said, oh, we're not supposed to. But it was interesting, it was fun. Okay, well, this is the other thing. Go to bed, right, that's good. Eat, oh, that's the other thing we do. Eat, eat, eat. So, modern industrial patterns, eat. All right. Broad sense, why sleep? Present ancestral organisms. Developmentally, it's particular. I think it has a strong development role. Development. How to sleep? Flip-flop switch. We've talked about that before. What do you do to wake up? And Rexon, when it's lost, tells you that it can go fairly quickly, one way or the other. But you know, even if you have somebody that's really sleep deprived, or kids, they'll fall asleep standing up. I remember watching baby sister fall asleep standing up at the back of the car. It was before seeing. Stabilizer. So I'm fascinated by sleep. Why is that? Because it's so mysterious. I mean, where did your mind go? Why do we dream? What do we dream? What we dream? The other world real, or communicating with others, such a fantastic mystery, you don't think so. Let's be honest. Human sleep habitat. So each of you has a personality in your bed. And, or if you've ever, as you grow up and you go through college and you go through medical school, and you stay with other people and roommates, or you have these things, you realize that you do have a personality. That what you like to do and how you like to sleep, whether it's cold or hot, covers or not. So the hominid dilemma was we were originally bipedal from the hands, clever brains, but as prey.
I have that same picture. I
Yeah.
got it from Chuck Bass, and it probably came from you.
Yeah.
Everything originates from Dr. Strohl. Now that I see that.
So living and communicating in groups, but as prey, infants are dependent on learning slow development. So where did we learn to sleep 300,000 years ago? And that's starting to evolve as they're finding, at least they're finding that the variant, we got up to 120,000 years, very complex variants. So grasping adaptation, building nests, sleeping like chimpanzees and groups like gorillas. No, so this is a yogi who's sleeping in a tree. How about that? These are people that are sleeping in tents that are tacked on to El Capitan. How about that, right? That's what you gotta take your tent with you and pick it in there and make sure you got it going. So how could you come to ground safety? How do you think that?
Well, same as sleeping in space, right? How do you train your mind to relax?
Train your mind to relax.
Yeah.
Yeah, that saber-tooth tiger out there is still out there, isn't it? You think those guys relax up there in space? They come down and they go, I take pills, they don't tell you, they have complete pharmacopoeia up there, they don't, doctor doesn't tell them when to take it, they take it. The first ones that went around, it's a 90-minute day up there going. It's 90 minutes light time. Wham, wham. So they would take sleeping pills and they would take uppers and lowers, all sorts of stuff. And that's what they don't tell you. They really, when they run out of it,
Well, would they sleep like the same kind of predators are sleeping, like when the sun's really hot?
fire,
Oh,
right? So that was it. Once you figured out how to control fire, there's a weapon, could be prolonged underground, communal structures. So what is this? People don't know.
you're,
Right? It's kind of neat. So now we have the sleep workout room. I don't know if you'll hear that. You see that on TV. We've got all these beds. We got this, the house, the pillow. This is a porcelain pillow from Mao Dynasty. It was actually not only, it's made out of porcelain, it's hollow, it has air that goes through it, so it's cool. You put your head on it. I've got one of the wooden ones from Africa that we've had on. Why do you have that? Well, people like to have pillows on it. The other is that it's cool, and this was handed down by a will from one person to another. And you can see that in the museum in Beijing. But the other reason is you keep your head off of what? The bugs. The bugs. Then you start to think. Pillow, the mattress. Standalone bedroom is the 17th century. Previously, people just slept in the same room. So we had clock, radio, TV, coffee maker, computer, dogs, cats. This is a room that was from a kid. Did you ever see that before?
It's quite a room.
That's quite a room, right?
No.
You actually know that you're in that room when you're asleep? No. So that's what it's interesting to see. And the other group that's really interesting is when they do for SIDS. At least I don't know if they do it here, but in New Zealand, they have a visit by a group of people that are very knowledgeable about it, very kind and very know what the sensitivity is, but to identify SIDS where it happened. And they said what you do is you walk into the room and realize, the bedroom and the bed sheet and where it is and how it is. That it's really different if you're walking in downtown areas and public housing, the different bedrooms. They're not all the same. They're really culture of napping. After the temperature dips, siesta is present. Behavior is what devalued in industrialization, associated with indolence and laziness, and never get caught napping. In Spain, they used to have a siesta, but there's now the major time that it was stopped was really by the manufacturing, because it costs a lot of money to stop the factory for 2 hours and then start it up again. It's really, but they have a different way of thinking about how they work and how they do. Miles to go before we sleep. What's your ritual? Cleaning, grooming, saying your prayers, reading, speaking. What clothing do we sleep in, if any? Here's a guy sleeping on the truck. And problems of excessive sleepiness, condition of being unable to perform as a consequence of physical, mental fitness. School performance, with puberty, there's a delay in sleep onset. Teenager is a night owl and probably physiologically so, because it drifts. You also start getting your dip around age 12, is it? You get that afternoon dip, that's with the puberty, that's with the, because the young kids don't take naps. Yeah. Maybe at the end of the drive. You're taking care of, you're taking care of, they're all afternoon long. It really is, wow, they go crazy.
They dip earlier, they just don't get enough sleep when they're teenagers, and so they, that afternoon's drowsiness is especially probably.
Well, you know, that's, Rhode Island studies with 14, 15-year-olds. And they did, Spilsbury did some stuff here as to when does that shift happen? And here it found it was pretty quickly, but it was a lot of behavioral because it was over the summer in which the parents were still going to work. They were being taken care of by their older siblings, and their older siblings were staying up late. And so it was really a rapid change between like 6th and 7th grade. It was like boom from like 8 o'clock at night to 1 o'clock. And that was hard to then stop at school times.
Too.
Has anybody been looking at, because we know puberty actually starts earlier now in a lot of populations than it used to, that the actual circadian rhythm.
Well, the person to look for on that is Mary Karsten. She's in Rhode Island, Brown University. She runs a camp for mostly undergraduates, college undergraduates, in which they go there and they help wire up 14-year-olds. And they do all sorts of questions. And she's following people. And the other person is Jim Spilsbury here.
Yeah,
And Jim is.
the other thing that happens with puberty is you start to decline your slow wave sleep. And so there are two things that happen, circadian, and so it's sometimes hard to tease those apart. Mary Karsten has done a beautiful job teasing those apart. It's super hard to do experimentally, but she has. So she's written about that too.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So, school performance, this is a school start time, really an interesting problem. Because the school start time makes it, that the younger grades, the earlier grades, the elementary schools should start earlier than the high schools. But the problem with the high schools is when you have football practice, when you have soccer practice, when you do those sorts of things, and how do you fit those in? And the other thing that comes in there is the teachers have kids, so they like to get home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and take care of their kids. Who's there when the kids get out of school? If they go in early.
It's when the teens get pregnant. Hey, it lines up real nice. Hey, trust me.
Everyone.
Oh, parents are.
Several years ago, we had a really an outbreak of pregnancies down in one of the high schools down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that? Oh, there was 4 girls that got pregnant with them. And I'm trying to figure out what the push was. And that's something.
In Atlanta, there was a school that was well known, and kids had a pregnancy pact going on,
Oh, my.
like 18-year-olds, like 13-year-olds.
So this is the sleepiness stuff. We'll talk about driving. It takes 4-second lapse of attention. And how many people have had drowsy driving in a rumble strip? Rumble strip is the most effective technological innovation to counter drowsy driving. That's why you have those rumble strips. So how did they do that? Well, they realized that there were certain parts of the New York State Thruway in which there were a lot of people going to the right or going to the left. There would be no braking, and they were having what they thought was false sleep car crashes, and so they put in grooves in that area for a mile before and a mile after, and guess what happened? They fell asleep 6 miles down the road. And so and that's why it's mandated. So it's like $40,000. I held to put those things in. That's really, you would think that would be easier. Dividing we sleep, socioeconomic housing access, disproportionate impact. We're talking about sleep health has a disproportionate impact that was recently. In the sleep journal. Sleep implicit policy, sleep interruption, public housing, school start times, residence intervals. Sleep less than 1 hour, 1 hour less than 1900. Attributed to labor. Do you think biologically we've changed? In 100 years, maybe evolved, so we don't need as much sleep. After oil, coffee is the second largest commodity, public housing policy, no interest, inherent sleep agenda. So I like to say one of my goals whenever I go and talk to people and they say, well, what do you like to say? Well, I'd like to elevate sleep to the same level, exercise and nutrition. Maybe. And then I usually start to talk by saying, well, how many of you people have had in your schooling, elementary through high school, have you had things on nutrition? Oh yeah. How many on exercise? Oh yeah, oh yeah. How many on sex? Oh yeah, oh, yeah. How many on sleep? Oh. Probably the best place to put it is in 5th and 6th grade, because and you can sort of put it in there and they don't think about it. I did that in 2001 with a sleep academic award. I went out to one of the grade schools and helped a class for a week do a program on sleep. And the major thing that happened is they're all very interested in it, but I talked about the driving, and all of them have like brothers that drive them to school or sisters that drive them to school. And they were really aware of drowsy driving. How many of your brothers and sisters when driving to school fall asleep at a red light? It's really interesting. And then the other thing is they were tattling parents that have sleep. Daddy snores really loud, really loud. Ultradian, sleep, circadian rhythm. Go to sleep, nothing good happens after midnight. Now, I think my mother got that from somebody. Makes sense. So she grew up in the 20s, like teens and 20s, sort of say, what did you do? It's fun to ask your grandparents about sleep, what they did, how you slept, what you did, where you did it. I remember my grandparents would get up in the middle of the night. My grandfather always got up in the middle of the night. He'd drink coffee. All right, thank you very much. We'll take any questions. Yeah, we'll stop sharing. See if there's any chat. Only Nardine is there. Any words of wisdom, Nardine?
Great lecture. Thank you.
See you later. We're gonna leave.
See you soon.
Was that it?